Thank you. The next category is the environment. Tawana, the first question is for you. In response to a League of Women Voters questionnaire on the topic of climate change, you said education is key in addressing climate change. We must have an open conversation where true understanding is gained. Given that 75% of Americans already think global climate change will harm future generations, do you think education about climate change is really the problem? And if so, how will education change things as quickly as needed?
I don't think that education is the problem, but I think education is pertinent. There are so many people who are confused about the difference between climate change and just simple changes in weather. Right now, the use of fossil fuels is causing a major impact on the climate. We have programs and organizations that have been very, they've just gone head in to let us know about particular changes that are occurring in the climate, as well as how we can help. Fossil fuels and emissions, if we don't take it seriously, the issue of climate change, the issue of global warming, it is going to affect us in the future. And when I spoke about education, I was speaking about the fact that I believe we need to start at the elementary school level, making the children aware of what their responsibilities are. There are studies that have proven that a lot of the issues with climate change are also human involved. What can we do? Do we support legislation that will support the carbon fee, where there would be a fee for carbon emissions? We have a responsibility, but just as with anything else, you have to start with education. If people are not aware that they are harming the environment, if they are not aware of the mechanisms to not harm the environment, then we continue to harm the environment. So I support organizations, I support legislation that is going to put forth efforts to reduce carbon emissions. I do know that climate change is something that if we don't put a handle on it now, we will pay for it later and in the very near future.
Mike, in a League of Women Voters questionnaire, you responded to a question about climate change by saying, I support the idea floated by the climate scientist James Hansen for taxing carbon extraction and then rebating the funds to every adult in the country. Can you explain how this would work and what you intend to do to make this system law?
Well, I think the tax on carbon extraction is one of a variety of measures that we could take to basically reduce climate change, improve our clean air, improve our clean water. I think the idea with an extraction tax is that basically to let these folks know, whether it's Exxon, Mobil, Citgo, all the energy companies that want to drill in Alaska, drill in Canada, drill in the Gulf, that as they take these fossil fuels out of the ground, that they're going to pay a fee, because we know that as soon as they're taken out of the ground, they're put into the marketplace, and they're going to be used to pollute the water, pollute the air, and unfortunately exacerbate climate change. I couldn't say that I have a super fine knowledge of every mechanism of this, but to me, the broad strokes are that we're going to tax the usage of carbon and use the economy to incentivize different solutions. Renewable energy, mass transit, ride sharing, all of these things to basically decrease the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. I think the other thing that we need to talk about is reforestation. I have had the privilege to speak with folks in the energy industry in Houston that accuse me of being anti-oil, and I was given a partial endorsement by the Houston Chronicle where they said I was too much in favor of renewable energy for the oil patch. And I took that as an insult that's a badge of honor, right? From their point of view, I'm too pro renewables. But one thing that has been pointed out to me is that, burning fossil fuels is only really, it's a substantial portion, but it's not even the majority of the cause of climate change in terms of human involvement. And deforestation might be even a greater cause of that. And so when we're talking about cutting down all these forests across the world to fuel the economy, that we're not replanting these forests, that's also a huge thing. And I see some young people in the crowd. I know a lot of us are encouraged to plant trees, and that's also something that we need to take on. Big picture, I think that the federal government needs to use its economic might to incentivize these economic changes that we want to see occur. So whether that's wind, solar, biofuels, the federal government can use its power to basically say, we're not going to subsidize fossil fuels. And that includes stop waging wars that benefit oil companies, because that's another subsidy. The war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, these are subsidies to the oil industry, and that should be part of the equation when we think about climate change. Thank you.
Our next topic is education. And the first question is for you, Mike. On your website, you say, I support amendments to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that would raise the floor of our public education system by reducing class sizes, increasing teacher compensation, providing for arts, athletics, and STEM programs, installing modern technology in every classroom, and guaranteeing quality special education programs. As you know, schools already lack resources to fix basic problems like worn-out textbooks and meet current standards. How would you propose to pay for the changes that you champion?
I mentioned this earlier. I don't buy into the premise that these programs are too expensive, whether you're talking about housing, education, or healthcare. The money is there. It's a question of how we use it. Matt Harris, who was one of the candidates in the same race earlier, talks about the giveaways of our broadband spectrum, of our telecommunications spectrum. I mean, there are so many things that are given away to massively wealthy corporations. So, for example, all those cable companies, internet companies, TV companies are using public resources to make their billions, but they're not paying for it. It's basically a giveaway. Radio as well. So the money is there. I would also look at cutting these wars. I would look at the corporate tax breaks and other things. But to me, in terms of education, it's primarily a state function. We know it's completely dysfunctional with the Robin Hood system here in Texas. For every additional dollar in taxes we pay in Austin, it seems like 95 cents goes to the state. And out of those 95 cents, only a few cents go back to the other counties. So the system's completely broken. The federal government has the carrot and the stick. So the carrot would be increased funding, all those things mentioned, to basically guarantee a baseline. To say, no matter where you are in this country, even if you're in Texas where they've put this artificial cap on special education services, the federal government is going to guarantee there's a baseline to take care of the basic needs of students. At the same time, the federal government needs to be willing to use the stick. Unfortunately, Texas, with these challenges to the public education funding model, judges have declined to force Texas to basically increase education funding. So what I think is the Department of Justice needs to sue Texas. It's not going to under Jeff Sessions, but basically to force Texas to meet the basic needs of special education students, elementary, middle school, high school students. The idea that there's places in Texas that don't have air conditioning during the summer or during the hot months is obscene. The idea that there's places that don't have technology in the classroom. If you don't know how to use the internet in this day and age, you're not going to be fit to be a worker in this economy. And so the federal government needs to take a more active role. The program that he references is what is commonly known as Title I and Title II. So those are two pathways to increase public education funding. Thanks.
Thank you. Tawana, you recently said on Facebook, I am committed to working in the U.S. Congress to author legislation that will give teachers across the country an increase in pay and protections for their pensions. Since education is an issue largely controlled by individual states, how do you intend to go about improving teacher pay at the federal level?
Thank you. Education, teachers, students, they are the foundation of our country. All of us sitting in here have benefited from a teacher. It is quite disheartening to know that so many of our teachers are with our children all day long. They are nurturing them. How many of you got your tooth pulled out by a teacher, right? They are doing everything within their power, yet when they leave at 3 o'clock or 3:30, they have to go and work another job. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. There is a need for an increase in pay for teachers. There also is a need for protections for our retired teachers, because they are now retiring, having to fight for their pensions, having to fight for insurance. Yes, much of our educational programs are statewide based, but I do believe that the crisis that is going on in the area of education is something that should be addressed federally. We do have the money. We have to decide how we're going to utilize it. When you look at the chairman of HUD spending $31,000 on a dining room table, trust me, he is not the only one that is wastefully spending our tax dollars. I do believe that I would have the support of not only citizens across the country, but other legislators that would work together with me, that would help me to author a bill that would provide for an increase in pay for our teachers. Let me let you all know something. If we don't invest in our teachers, we are going to have a shortage of teachers. No one is going to want to go in for this. Then we're going to have more issues with our children not being prepared to compete globally. We have schools that have no libraries, they have no computers, yet they're all responsible for passing a standardized testing. The same teachers who are being underpaid are responsible if their students don't pass the test. So I know that a federal legislation to increase teachers' pay is something that is needed and something that I will get passed.